four things really. Who we are, why we care about this topic. When I say we, I mean citizens rights. I mean the world we why we care about this topic, what we found, and what we're doing next. I'm slightly worried that my slides might be over 7 minutes, so I don't want to dreaded card. So I might have to ask you to rattle through some of them.
Can you turn the mic on or someone plays you?
Sorry?
I can't hear you.
Can't hear me? I think.
Hello?
Nice. So, just a little bit about Citizens Advice. Citizens Advice is a civic institution founded in 1939. We help people solve their problems by providing impartial, confidential, independent advice. Last year we helped kind of around 2.5 million people solve 6.2 million problems. You'll see local citizens advice on the high street across England and Wales. You might be familiar with some of the work that they do. Just a kind of overview of that. Next slide, please. This is on context. I really don't think I need to go over it with you guys here. Voting is down. That chart on the right-hand side shows that it's actually unequal across the age groups. You can see that by the way the lines spread apart. Next slide, please. Also, these charts reflect kind of trust, both in government to do the right thing. The yellow line shows the number of people who think they almost never do the right thing. The blue line shows the portion of people who think they just about or sometimes always do the right thing. And politicians, fair and better. This shows basically that people increasingly think politicians are just out for themselves versus people who think they're out for their country. So the blue line is people across the years who think politicians are out for themselves, and the yellow column are people who think that politicians are out for the country. The issue is that turnout's down, trust is down. You could measure party membership as well. There's basically a crisis in our democracy. Next slide, please. But this happened in Scotland. So these friendly-looking people are people who are very engaged with the Scottish referendum. That was a kind of sign that actually all this crisis of democracy actually isn't as kind of bad as we think. There are moments when people actually do really care about getting involved and engaged in issues that they feel are relevant. So we did some research and we wanted to kind of use our uniquely citizens advice perspective to understand really what is it that people feel about democracy, what are their attitudes and engagement with it. We felt that the kind of democratic engagement debate was based on a narrow definition of what it means to be civically involved, and as citizens advice we know that people come in when they have problems, when they want to give back to society through being volunteers, and so we wanted to apply that lens to the democratic engagement debate. But with this, with this definition of democracy, so we think democratic engagement is about having influence over the decisions and services that affect your life every day. It's not just about voting, it's about a much richer range of activities. So we did some research, as you do, nationally representative poll of over 2,000 people. We found that the public are committed to making a difference. The majority of people feel a personal responsibility to give back to their communities. And of those who do actually kind of engage, the most common activity is signing a petition. But there's a kind of really broad range of activities there. Government data back this up. 69% of people volunteered last year. 47% of people volunteered at least once a month. You know, we know that people are actively involved in their communities. So then the question is, what explains the kind of trend of disengagement that we see across the years? Next slide. What we found is that democratic processes feel out of sync with people's lives. So the citizens don't feel that the political class or the political system reflect the responsible behaviours and civic behaviours that the citizens themselves uphold. We also found quite striking that across many public and political areas, political representation stands out as the area of life that people are least confident about. That includes areas like health, like crime, and that was quite striking that even across all of those issues, political representation is the area that people are least confident about. Next one. So we dig a little deeper and we kind of asked people what they thought would help them get more involved in civic and public life, and we found that the three most popular answers were time, confidence, and kind of a broader range of avenues to get involved, so online and email. And we thought this kind of reflected that people tend to think that democracy just demands too much of people. There's too many barriers. There's too much kind of required of people to get involved and to have influence. And digging a little bit deeper, we found kind of basically two kinds of biases in the way that democratic processes are set up. The first is the financial security bias. So we asked people how secure or confident they felt about various aspects of their life over the next 5 to 10 years. We found that 35% of people felt that they were not confident about their financial security, and we labelled that group the financially insecure, and then looked how they answered questions about their attitudes and engagement with civic life. We found that they were poorly represented across all measures. This chart here shows levels of representation by financial security. You can see on the far left there is the financially insecure, on the far right is the financially secure. There's a massive relationship between financial security and how well represented people feel by their local and national representatives. Obviously, we could only kind of draw a correlation here, but our instinct is that there's a sense in which if you're likely to be if you're financially insecure, you're likely to be thinking about your finances over the months and years to come, you have less headspace basically to kind of do battle with the overly complex and demanding processes that exist to kind of have influence locally and nationally. And so there's a sense in which democratic processes might just demand too much headspace from the people who are particularly low on headspace because they're thinking about managing their finances for the coming years. We also found another bias, so we asked people about various aspects of their personalities. One of the questions we asked was how assertive you think you are, and 41%, I actually thought that was quite high, 41% of people define themselves as assertive. And across all measures of attitude and participation, the assertive tend to participate more, tend to think that processes are working far better. And we kind of saw this played out in a lot of the kind of open text boxes that we allowed respondents to fill in. So I have not got enough confidence to get involved. I feel this is far too above me to get involved with. I don't understand politics enough to feel confident in voicing my opinions. I cannot always express my opinions easily or clearly, and sometimes feel that I'm having my opinions swept under the carpet. So there was definitely a sense throughout the survey that the systems and processes were biased in favour of the kind of sharp elbow, the people who knew how to work the system and how to kind of get their voice heard. Next slide, please. So kind of our proposition is basically what we describe as a kind of democracy that goes with the grain. We think that democracy should be responsive to the kind of the actual personalities and behaviours of people, not we should respond to how they actually behave and how we think they ought to behave. And in that way we kind of harness the energy and motivation and commitment of all people when they want to get back to civic life. We kind of divide some design principles for this. The first is, I mean, they're quite kind of straightforward, but we actually think if they were played out in democratic processes, then there'd be a quite radical reform of a lot of processes. So information, all public information should be published and presented so that it's easily accessible as possible. Accessibility, democratic processes and channels for influence should be co-located in places where people actually spend time instead of asking people to come to them all of the time and experience. So user experience and journey should be the centre of all democratic processes and channels for influence. And if you think about the way a lot of processes are set up at the moment, it's clear that the experience of kind of making your voice heard and have influence isn't kind of essential to how they're set up. There's actually quite a few examples of this in local government already. So of information, there is Nottingham Council did a really interesting kind of interactive infographic where there's bubbles and you can kind of zoom into the bubbles to see how money is spent across the local council. Accessibility, Dudley did doing a really interesting project around kind of community engagement and experience. I'm going to shout out to Democracy Club because I think the whole point of Democracy Club is about kind of making the user experience of engaging in democracy a lot more user friendly. Next slide. So this is just the example of the Nottingham infographic. So I mentioned that it was clear before. It doesn't look that clear now. But that's because it's a kind of static on the page thing where actually how it's meant to be used is you can kind of click through to any of the bubbles, it gets a lot bigger, you can really zoom in and out to see how the council actually spends residents' money. Next slide. So this is a kind of design principles in practice. So at Citizen Advice we're thinking about how to really put into practice this thinking about democratic processes and how they should be improved. One example is complaints. So I suppose typically in the democratic engagement debate, we try to keep separate democratic processes and issues to do with service delivery. I think actually that distinction is quite hard to maintain, and complaints are a really good example because they kind of straddle both. It's a way that you can make your voice heard about the decisions and services that affect your life, but it's also about service delivery. At Citizens we've seen complaints issues rise over the last 4 years. You can see that on the kind of wobbly line in the chart, the wobbly blue line in the chart. And we also know that though many people experience poor public service, very few people complain. And so there's a kind of sense in which public services aren't reaping the insight and intelligence that they could from users, and we should change the system to make it a lot simpler. One of the ways is by aggregating data from social media. Here, this chart shows, what does it show? The blue line is the number of tweets at DVLA over the course of a year. And, at complaints at DVLA over the course of the year. And the orange line is the complaints that specifically have to do with the flag, the introduction of the UK flag. This was a really hot topic last year or the year before because of the Scottish referendum, and so lots of Scots were really angry that the UK flag was being introduced to the driving licence. And that big orange spike reflects at the time when DVLA sent out quite a provocative letter to people congratulating them on the fact that the UK flag had been added to the driving licence, and lots of Scots got really, really angry about that and started tweeting. So I suppose the point is here how we can actually gather intelligence about complaints via social media if we're a lot more savvy with the way that we use technology.